Hello.
I want to dedicate this to my mother, who's here, who had me at home when there were very, very few babies being born at home in 1970. I just outed myself as having just turned 40. But 40 years ago, it was very, very difficult to find a doctor and who would come to your house, and there really were no midwives, or very, very few, and so my mom had me basically unassisted in a small apartment in San Jose, and so she set me up to be completely confident about the normalcy and the total natural progression of pregnancy to birth all at your home. And for me, there was just never any question in my mind that I would have my own children at home. So in some ways, I'm not the best person to speak about the difficulty of making that decision, because for me it was never a difficult decision. And what I run into with a lot of friends and students who come to me and are curious about home birth is the cultural bias against home birth, and that socially everything that's out there about what birth is takes place in a hospital. And all of the imagery, all of our television, all of our media is about birth being one way, and that's on your back in a bright lit room, doctors running around and drama, and and not the coziness of a home. And so making that leap from what we have in our minds as what birth is and how birth is going to look and how one's own birth is going to look to another thing is, I think, one of the difficult transitions to make, as well as all of the more practical issues of safety concerns and what happens if, and what does my husband think, what do my parents think, and all of the other choices that weigh on us. So this is obviously what comes up a lot, and for most people, and even if you do feel really convinced that being at home is the right place for you to be, there's always going to be questions. What if? What happens if? And that's always the loaded question when you're at home. What if I need a doctor? But if you're healthy, and if you have no complication, and you don't have high blood pressure, and you're not having twins. Most midwives won't deliver twins at home. Some midwives won't even deliver a breech at home because it can be complicated. But if everything's going normally, statistically you're better off being at home. There are less maternal and fetal deaths. There's less injury. There's far less infection. There's of course less C-section rates, and of course you don't ever have a C-section at home. But the transfer rates are fairly for home births are about 6 to 8%, and then about 4% of those women who are transferred from home to a hospital, about 4% of those end in a vaginal delivery at the hospital, and about 2% end in C-section rates. So the overall C-section rate for home births is about 2%, and in the general populations it's 30% and growing. So, of course, in hospital births, there's many higher risk people. So it's a skewed statistic to some extent. There's more people who end up with cesareans because they need to, and something very dangerous is happening. And thank God that we have medical intervention when we need it. But who knows? You can never have babies twice. You never really know how it would go in both situations. But it can't be, that skew between 2% and 28% difference is so vast. And what is very clear from all of the statistical and just experiential evidence is that intervention leads to intervention. And you get, things are progressing at home, and you get in a hospital and your body starts to seize up and things slow down, and then you get to the hospital and then they want to speed things up, so you get some Pitocin to speed things up, and then that gets really painful, so you get an epidural, and then you can't feel, and then maybe that leads to a C-section. There's all kinds of things that can happen. Now, that being said, I always say to people who are interested in the possibility of a home birth, but scared that the most important thing of all is to be comfortable. And if you are most comfortable in a hospital, that is the place to be, no question, to have a baby. What your body needs is comfort level. And that's how your body responds to all of the myriad chemical, hormonal changes that eventually lead to a successful birth. If you're on the fence and you're curious or you're interested and you want to, but you're scared, I'd say that's where the research comes in, and talking to people who have, and reading extensively and watching videos and going into the possibility of rewiring your brain and your cultural expectation about what birth can be and should be, to entertain the real possibility of staying at home. So I guess I would say, I'm not an expert at all in this area, except for having been through it 3 times. But I'm just a very passionate advocate. And, I'm an advocate as a woman. I feel like to be able to be the leader of your own birth, to be able to actually give your own birth instead of being at your own birth, if that makes any sense, is such a wonderful gift to give yourself, to give yourself the possibility of letting it happen in your own home, or in an environment that is not being directed by a hospital staff and hospital procedures. And I feel like it's, as a home birth supporter, you're also advocating for fathers, because inevitably, as the father at home in a home birth, you're intimately involved in a way that it's very difficult to be in a hospital, because there's so many other things happening. There's the fetal heart monitor, which just sucks everybody in like a vortex on the side. And the husband is an integral part of every home birth experience, or the partner, whoever that key partner is. And in my experience, and in most of the women I know who've been through a home birth, the midwife is fairly peripheral. I mean, unless things are getting hairy, it's really kind of you and your team, and the midwife is just kind of the Oz behind the scenes, and that's a really amazing thing to realize, that you really don't need anybody. I mean, that you probably could do it unassisted. We're animals after all, and we have bodies that are meant to give birth to babies. As an advocate for babies, who, in my opinion, should have the best opportunity to come out vaginally with all of the benefits of going through the birth canal and being massaged through the birth canal without any drugs in your bloodstream. The possibility of those things are wonderful and should be supported. And then as a yogi, which many of you in this room are, it's and this is true certainly for all births, and it goes without saying that in any birth situation, hospital or at home, but it is the place where you really get to use your skills. And there's no time like under the force of a contraction when you need to use your yogic power. And so I feel like to take that on as a part of your practice, and to decide that you're going to meet this sensation head on without the option of pain medication, because there is no option when you're at home, it's a great place to go. And I mean, it really hurts, for those of you who haven't been there yet, or are not going to ever go there as a man. But, there's no question that it really hurts. But if someone's there dangling an epidural needle at you, and you have the thought in your mind, like, I could just, check out now, I don't have to feel this, it makes the pain so much less bearable, because you get to weigh this option. But if there is no option, it is what it is. I mean, you really are sitting with what you've got. Then there's just I feel like a peace with sensation that comes that's amazing. And being able to move through that is profoundly empowering. And there's no physical sensation that comes at me now that I can't meet peacefully in a way. If that makes any sense. So, in the interest of putting out the alternative visual to what we see on all the birth channel stuff, I have a little slideshow of 2 of my births, and enjoy.
Baby, burn brightly, 'cause you don't have too long. But baby, burn brightly, in spite of all that's going on. When we are born, we're born with a matchbook. The question is, how do we use them? Baby, burn brightly. You got so much to give. But baby, burn brightly. I know it's hard when life's too much to give. So then you take a match and you light it. The others wait till you can no longer fight it. The urge to explore, the urge to divide, the urge to reveal all that's inside of your soul, waiting. The urge just to be a little bit more, the urge just to see what all this is for.
That's all. I'll take questions.
Did you have doulas at your birth?
I did at my first birth. I had the midwifery practice had 2 people always, and one would act as a doula. And then at my sister-in-law was there too, sort of on the spur of the moment, and so it was sort of like lots of doulas around. And then at my second and third birth, I had just a friend there who was, helpful. The people around are always super helpful. I feel like doulas are great, and especially great if you're going to a hospital, because they can help you stay at home as long as possible, and they can be your advocate at the hospital. And if you really want to try and do it without medication, they can be your advocate when you're screaming for the medication. Yeah, I think having helpful people around, whether they're officially a doula or whether it's your mother or your sister or your friend, bodies running around, getting you something to drink and like holding your hand, and there's really not. Jeff and I had figured that we wanted almost no one in the room for our first birth. We had this idea of it being very small and sacred and intimate, but actually in the thick of it, you don't really care. I mean, by the end, it was a football team in our room. Seriously, my grandfather, his wife, and their dog were there. So, I think that planning on having helpful bodies is great, unless you are. Some people just want to be alone in a cave, and they want everybody to exit stage left too. So, but I think being prepared to have help is always smart. Knowledgeable help, absolutely. And doulas are great. Yeah. Anything else?
In this country, from historical point of view, when did the shift come to birth in a hospital?
That's a good question. It came in the around the 1920s and 30s, and from what I've read, it happened because of a number of things. Part of it was a shift into the urbanization, and people living in cities and having access to hospitals, where when it was rural, it was really just small country doctors, and they were trained, and your doctor delivered your babies. It was just sort of a natural thing, and there were more lay midwives at that time because of there being things being more rural, and then developments in really medical developments changed so much. Before C-sections became more and more prevalent, when there really wasn't an option, it wasn't seen as a good thing to be at the hospital, and so for a while there was a big shift towards thinking it was very, very dangerous to be at home, and only poor people or people who couldn't afford to have the luxury of being in a hospital had home births. And so if anybody who had the choice went to a hospital, and so it just became a cultural bias more than anything else. It was also, one thing that I read that was interesting was that it was also the advent of insurance. And as simple as that, insurance immediately would cover, and which is still a big issue. Many insurance carriers won't cover home birth. So even if you want to, your choice is, just on a totally practical level, am I going to shell out $6,000 to $10,000 of my own money and have a baby the way I want to, if you want to have it at home, or am I going to have it covered completely and have a birth that's going to cost my insurance $30,000 to $40,000 maybe, but they'll cover it. So, from what I understand, and maybe somebody here knows more about that than I do, it was kind of a convergence of the development of medicalized birth, urbanization, and health insurance. Thanks, you guys. Thank you so much for coming.